Well, let's get some perspective on all of this from Fen Hampson. He is a Chancellor's Professor at Carleton University and Director of Global Security Research at the Centre for International Governance Innovation. Fen Hampson, good to see you again.
Peter, good to be with you.
Thanks for coming to talk about this. The Prime Minister says, you know, it could be hard for Canada to cancel the contracts for those light armored vehicles that Canada has with the Saudis worth some 12 or 13 billion dollars because of the penalties involved, which he suggested today could be around $1 billion. And I guess what I want to know is how you think that argument plays. Is it a dangerous argument for a Prime Minister and a government that says it's committed to advancing human rights, but then holding up concerns about the lost revenues or penalties the country might have to pay?
Well, it's certainly an interesting way to frame it around penalties. But I think, you know, the bigger issue is there are lots of authoritarian regimes in the world. They haven't gone away. We dealt with some, obviously, during the Cold War. And this is a classic case of values and interests coming into conflict in Canadian foreign policy. I think the bigger challenge, Peter, for the government right now is if we're going to do anything, if we're going to freeze the contract until we find out, you know, what really happened and, you know, the information continues to trickle out, we should be doing it with our allies in concert so that there is one message that is being sent to the Saudis on this particular issue, but more generally in terms of the human rights performance of the regime.
It sounds to me like that might be what's happening. Both the Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs have said they're consulting heavily now with allies. Do you think that's what the consultations are about, is that rather than have somebody step out and then be isolated by Saudi Arabia, we come out as a group and then it's harder for them to pick on somebody?
I think that's a lot of it. I mean, I think this is also a case of once bitten, twice shy. I mean, the famous tweet about the two female human rights activists who were arrested by the Saudis are now in jail. We paid a price for that. The Saudis started pulling investments out of Canada. And also, you know, there was the threat to take medical students studying at Canadian universities. You know, they negotiated a soft landing on that particular issue. But I think the you know, the government realizes, you know, we're a relatively small player when it comes to Saudi. We don't have extensive trading and investment ties, but we have some important interests there. And I think there's a desire, obviously, to not to send a message, but not to damage economic interests.
We also heard from the leader, the NDP leader is pretty clear on this. He thinks we ought to just cancel the deal and send a message to the Saudis. The leader of the official opposition, Andrew Scheer, won't say whether he would cancel the deal or not. He says it's okay to have, it's time to have that discussion about what to do with Saudi Arabia, but he pivoted to say that the secret to all of this is to get off Saudi oil, and, you know, sort of, so he's pivoting the message to something entirely different. I guess it makes me wonder, what is it about this relationship, and you've touched somewhat on it, that makes it such a challenge for Canadian leaders to come down on a side that might actually put us offside with the Saudis?
Well, I think, you know, first of all, there's some major Canadian companies that are doing business in Saudi Arabia. SNC-Lavalin, which has major construction projects. I mean, you know, tens of billions of dollars there. Barrick's Gold has a big operation in Saudi Arabia. You know, when it comes to Saudi exports of oil to Canada, that hurts them too, right? So let's, you know, they don't really want to necessarily shoot themselves in the foot. They already did that once when they were divesting of some of their Canadian holdings. But I think, you know, it's the old story. Do you engage a regime? Do you do business with them? Do you try to promote change in their behavior? Important to bear in mind that the actions of Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince, who appears to have his fingerprints all over the Khashoggi affair, he's not that popular in Saudi Arabia. He put a lot of the members of the extended royal family and he incarcerated them in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. He is waging a very unpopular war in Yemen that has had regional repercussions. And I think, the hope is to, really put some serious pressure on the regime. We recognize we can't do it alone to come clean on this one, to clean up their act when it comes to human rights. And maybe at the end of the day, King Salman will decide that, his heir apparent should be somebody else.
Do you, what's the role of the United States in all of this? I mean, when Canada's consulting allies, should we assume that the United States is being consulted or not? Because you have Donald Trump essentially out in front of everybody else saying, I want the details of what happened to Mr. Khashoggi, but we're not cutting off business with the Saudis. We've got $110 billion worth of trade involved with them. And it's a big deal, 1 million American jobs. We're not cutting ties with these people. So what role does the U.S. play in all this?
Well, the U.S. is critical, and I mean, the rap on the president is that there is an authoritarian leader that he doesn't like and doesn't want to do business with. After all, his first visit overseas wasn't to Canada or to Mexico. I mean, to the neighbors. It was to Saudi Arabia, and he has said quite openly, major business interests there. His family has major business interests there. But even the president himself is feeling the heat on this one. Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican senator, very close to the administration, has come out calling for sanctions against the regime. There's obviously bipartisan support in the Congress on this one. So I think it's fair to say we're talking to the administration, I think if we're going to do this right, we need to be doing it with the Americans, we need to be doing it with the British, we need to be doing it with the French. The Germans have already shown their hand. They've frozen arms sales. That means they're suspended temporarily. It doesn't mean they've canceled them.
Germany's done this in the past, I think, with where they've suspended and then
exactly
and then restarted them.
That's right. That's right. And we could have done the same, but I think this time the government realized that much better to act in concert with others. And quite frankly, if you're trying to send a message to the regime and to the Crown Prince that this kind of behavior is not acceptable in the 21st century. Democratic, like-minded countries should be acting together. The alliance, the West has been in disarray, and I think this is an opportunity really for us to work together because we all have values and interests that are at stake.
All right, Fen Hampson, always good to get your perspective. Thanks again tonight.
My pleasure.